I'm excited tonight to be joined by Thomas Frank, the author of the book Listen Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. I'm a fan of his. The first book I think I've read of his was What's the Matter in Kansas, or with Kansas. And it started unpacking how a lot of Republicans vote against their best economic interest. And he unpacked the reasons why. And I was excited to get this book because the level of analysis he did with the Republican Party, he turned around and now did with the Democratic Party. And it was meat and manna for me, because I was really thinking about some of these things at the same time that the book came out. And it's always good to be able to read someone who's put things into context that you've been thinking about. And so we're trying to connect with them now, just trying to get video connected. As soon as we get the video connected, we'll bring him on. There we go. Mr. Frank, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me. My audience is excited about this conversation. We want to talk briefly about your book, and then I want to actually bring it to life and put it in context of this election, because there's so many things happening to the Democratic Party right before our eyes. So let's just start with a real quick softball. Why did you write the book? What compelled you to write this book?
Listen Liberal?
Yeah, Listen Liberal.
Well, you were talking about What's the Matter with Kansas a second ago, and I have written 3 books about the conservatives, the Republican Party and the conservative movement. But when you look at the broad sweep of where we are, and you can't blame everything on them. There's, it's a two-party system. And there's this other half of the world that I hadn't been writing about, but it also it's also the challenge of the thing. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be, in my opinion, if you're going to be an honest commentator, you have to take on the subjects that are hard as well as the subjects that are easy. And writing about the conservatives, it's like making fun of Trump. Like it's too easy right now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. I was reading somewhere on Facebook. There was one particular scholar who said the reason she won't even give Donald Trump any of her intellectual brain space, is because of exactly what you said. Like, it's just too easy. So part of this,
it's too easy, and it makes you feel stupid just in even engaging.
It does.
Seriously.
It's obvious, right? The things about Trump is obvious. But I like what you said, though, that, because this is the same space I was in. I was in the same mental space, I would say, about 2006, 2007, where I could clearly see the shift in American politics towards the right. And I can see the part of the conservative movement that was causing it. But then later on, I would say around 2008, when I saw President Obama pick Timothy Geithner, and I saw everything happening with the bailout, I was like, wait a minute, hold on, something else is afoot here. And so for you, you're saying that you spotted that and you dug into it and you discovered, or you just realized that this is an intentional shift towards the right by the corporate ring of the Democratic Party to embrace policies that are more beneficial for corporate America versus the average American. Just unpack the basic premise.
Yes, absolutely.
There.
Well, that's the big subject, and I know you've spoken about it so many times. But for me, Obama's election was a big turning point in all sorts of ways. I was very enthusiastic about it. I don't think I've ever talked to you about this before. I don't think I've ever talked to you, period, before.
Yeah, that's our first time.
But I used to live in Hyde Park, which is this neighborhood in Chicago. In fact, that's where I wrote What's the Matter with Kansas. Mm-hmm. And he was our state senator, Barack Obama. And I once met him at a house party. You'd see him at community gatherings and everything. And I was a big fan. I thought he was a great man. Mm-hmm. I still do, to a certain degree. I still think he's. We'll get to that later. That I have mixed feelings about him now, because I want him to be a great president, but well. Okay. So anyhow, he comes into office, right? In 2008, and I was so excited. One of the reasons that I was most excited about voting for him was that he signified to me the end of the grip of the Clintons on the Democratic Party and the Clinton faction on the Democratic Party. You know, the Democratic Leadership Council, the sort of centrist group. I was never a big fan of Bill Clinton back in the 1990s. Bill Clinton had really made me angry with all the bank deregulation, you know, welfare reform. The big crime bill of '94, which at the time, you know, nobody even talked about, but it infuriated me. And so Barack Obama looked to me in 2008 like this was the chance to finally break the grip of that faction on the Democratic Party. And he gets elected. And it's a wonderful thing, and he looks like exactly the right man for the moment. He looks like the Franklin Roosevelt of our time, you know, steps into office at the moment when the country needs him most, you know, in the middle of this terrible financial crisis. And what does he do? Who does he bring in with him? I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It's the same people, you know. It's Larry Summers,
yeah,
you know, Clinton's old Treasury Secretary. You know, he brings in all of these Robert Rubin proteges. You know, he brings in Tim Geithner, as you mentioned. You just go right to, and of course Hillary herself. You go right down the list, and it's like he capitulated completely to this faction that I thought he had been elected to. You know, to toss them out, but it's worse than that, because then he proceeded to never really do what the country, or what people like me anyway, expected him to do, to get tough with Wall Street, you know, to take the opportunity presented by the bailouts, by the recession, to really transform the economy of this country. And he had the power to do it. The country was at his back. You know, 1 million people on the Mall here in Washington for his inauguration. The man was beloved. He had a majority in both houses of Congress, and it was just, and so that's really the beginning of the book, is when I ask that question: what happened with this guy? You know, history dealt him 4 aces. How did he come away with so little? You know, that's the question that I ask, and then the rest of the book is me trying to answer, you know, grappling with that problem and trying to answer the question.
So it's one of the. So my natural train of thought, and trying to answer that question myself, was to start treading into the area that you have in the book, where you see that this wasn't a mistake in a lot of ways. Like, if you go back and read Dreams of My Father, and you hear him espouse some of the things
I love that
wrote,
book, by the way. I thought that was a great book.
It's a great book, but then, like, there's one section where he started talking about what he believes politically, and he starts going down talking point after talking point. He could very well have just been a Republican saying the same exact thing. And so then it started dawning on me, this wasn't a mistake. I think a lot of people see Obama as being weak and not able to get done what he wanted to get done. But how much of this do you think was intentional? This is exactly the strategy that he wanted to go in with.
Yeah, well, that's the conclusion that I came to after looking at these things, was that the only way to explain the results that he got is that's how he wanted things to unfold. That he played the situation with Wall Street, for example, exactly the way he wanted to play it. I mean, that's the only reasonable conclusion to come to. Once you've looked at all the evidence. By the way, I know the passage you're thinking of. I don't think it's in Dreams from My Father. I think it's in the other one.
You're right. It's in
Audacity. Oh, I've got it right here. Yeah. I've got the book right behind me here. His other memoir, the one about his time in the Senate.
Yeah, that's
Audacity of Hope. And I read that one too. And you know, it's a funny thing, because I read that and I thought that was all. Are we allowed to curse on your show?
Yeah. No, we're go for it.
I thought that was all just bullshit. He was just saying that to make people happy. You know, the other stuff that he was saying, like when he gave that great speech at Cooper Union, I thought that was the real deal. But all the nice stuff about, you know, there is no red states, there is no blue states, there's only the United States. I thought that was just to reel in the suckers. You know, and it was the opposite. opposite. He meant that stuff. It was the stuff that I thought was so great.
Yeah.
Was the stuff that was just window dressing.
Yeah, and
So
he had that ability, right? And I don't want to make this a
still
referendum
does.
on.
He still does. He still does. I saw his speech at the Democratic Convention. At the Democratic Convention, they're out there waving signs that say "No TPP," right?
Right.
You know, everybody's really angry at that, and he comes out, and they are, ecstatic.
Yeah.
He's the greatest man there ever was. They, people still fall. I still fall for him. I love the way he speaks.
Let's go. So let's go to that dissonance. That dissonance that was on display at the Democratic Convention, which I think embodies is best personified by what you wrote in the book. Right? There's this dissonance that we saw on display. You saw no TPP signs everywhere. But here comes the Democratic champion for the president for the TPP on stage, and they simultaneously erupt into tremendous uproar of applause for this president. So here you have the Democratic Party ostensibly fighting with itself over the TPP, and we have no one else to blame at this point but the Democratic Party. What did you think about that tension, and what does that say about what the Democratic Party really is today?
But that's the entire convention. This is I've been trying to write about this ever since I got home from Philadelphia, and I've had a lot of trouble with this because it's not because it's not a good subject, but because it's hard for me to nail it down. But there's many examples of this. Of, say, Elizabeth Warren gave this great speech where she's deploring inequality and the way like the bankers completely got off the hook, and it's like, but this is your team did this, your guys did this. There were many speeches like this. Hillary herself, in her speech, said, that we are the party of working people. Okay, that's great. I wish they were.
Right.
If you go out into the parking lot and they've got this big tent for Uber, they struck a special deal with Uber to take the delegates to and from the convention. It's like Uber and the Philadelphia taxi cab drivers, they don't really get along. Yeah. It's not, but there's they're contradicting themselves all over the place. They're, reaching out to the peace faction, and then at the same time reaching out to the militarist faction on the same day. Yeah. They don't know where they are. They want to be all things to all people. And what's really funny is they're going to be, because the Republicans have just completely self-destructed. So there is no real challenge to them this year. She's going to sail in, I think, without any serious challenge. The only real challenge was in the primary.
Right. Which we could probably talk about at length.
Yeah, for a long time.
So let's go with that next thing that you just mentioned, right? Because one of the things that you talk about in the book is the similarities. Now, once you unpack the Democratic Party from the perspective that you unpacked it, you start seeing the similarities between the Democratic and the Republican Party, which they're essentially both two opposite sides of the same coin, the coin of neoliberalism. So unpack that a little bit, and then I want to tie it into where the party is going now that there is no viable Republican Party. Yeah.
Well, God, isn't that just a mind-blowing subject right there?
Yeah.
But let's go back to the history of this thing, okay? Because it's an easy thing to write a book that's just a catalog of the Democrats' failures, like all the different ways that they screwed up over the years, all the different ways that they sold out their base and they betrayed, this demographic and that, and this part of their constituency and that. And there's many examples, and they're all in there, or a lot of them are in there, but that's not good enough. What I wanted to do in Listen Liberal was to explain why they do this and come up with a consistent theory for it. And you can find it when you start to dig, because the Democrats have actually been over the decades, have been pretty open about why they do the things that they do. And it goes back to the early 70s when they decided that, this is during the Vietnam War, after the 68 convention, you've got the kids in the street fighting with the Chicago police, all this kind of thing is going on. And the Democrats decided that they wanted to make a break with their traditional constituent groups. They wanted to make a break with who they had been in the past. And they decided they didn't really want to be be the party of organized labor anymore.
Right.
And this is not something that they did secretly. This is something that was it was much discussed at the time. And it's also something that is easy to understand because a lot of unions back then were, big, hulking, slow-moving, very white, very top-heavy, or not particularly democratic organizations that supported President Johnson on the Vietnam War. And so the Democrats are saying, look, this is kind of, we want to be identified with a different group that's much more progressive, much more liberal, and that's what they call the affluent white-collar suburbanites or white-collar professionals is what they call them. And they said, and they were very open about this. This is who we wanted. They wanted to identify the party with instead. This is this very admirable group, and you can really understand why they made that decision in those days, in the late 60s and early 70s. The idea that working people would soon be, just have their fortunes completely ruined for them by the, the global economy, that wasn't even on the radar screen back then. Working people were doing really well back then. They were in the middle class, that kind of thing. The idea that the economy that deindustrialization would overtake huge parts of the Midwest, and that's all the things that have happened, none of that was on the radar screen back then. So that, they did this, I think, in good conscience, but they've stuck with it over the years and over the years and over the years and over the years, and now we're in a very different situation. And where working people, the working class generally, is watching their way of life
disappear.
Disintegrate.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party doesn't really give a damn. Instead, they scold these people. Open up the New York Times and read Tom Friedman. They scold these people, and say you should have gone to college, and maybe you did go to college, but you didn't study the right subject, or you didn't get a STEM degree or whatever it is. You're not in an innovative industry. It always goes back to being your own fault. But what I trace in Listen Liberal is the Democrats, when they embraced this new constituency, the affluent white collar professionals, when they embraced this new group, they embraced an entire theory of politics, an entire way of looking at the world. And it's the word that you just used before, which I don't like to use, but it's neoliberalism. It's what they call it in England. And but we all know what that means. They embraced what they call globalization, high tech, what they call creative industries, but above all, industries that employ professionals. And so you go down the list of the industries that Democrats really admire: Silicon Valley, big pharma, but above all, the answer: Wall Street.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when they this begins, their sort of love affair with Wall Street begins during the Clinton years. Clinton, by the way, was one of the greatest, most dedicated to this sort of theory of politics, where it's all about the professional class. That's who he was. One of his cabinet secretaries, Robert Reich, who's actually a very good guy now, but had actually written a whole book about this subject. And Clinton reached out to Wall Street, and the whole theory there is that Wall Street is one of these creative industries. It employs these very sophisticated, highly educated people with advanced degrees. It's people just like us. It's people just like the people at the top of the Democratic Party. And that's the story. It's their love affair with this group of people, this people at the very top, at the very pinnacle of American society, who the Democrats have come to love. And so it's a kind of liberalism of the rich, is the way I always put it. And I'm sorry, I talk way too much. I mean, you got me going there, and I just can't. Sometimes I can't stop, and I know I need to shut up so that you can answer.
No. It's fine. I trust me. If my audience was getting disengaged, I would know by now. So feel free. They would have let me know. This is very interactive. So you're getting some great feedback already. So feel free to go in. But let's drill down a little bit further. Then, so they pulled this off in the late 60s, early 70s. They carry it through to fruition. And now we're at this point where I'm calling it like the final form of the DLC. Like it's the truncating of the the bigoted class, whatever you want to call them, those who won't ever agree on social issues on the right. And then they're shedding. We see Hillary Clinton is doing an intentional, in my opinion, shedding of the progressive left. And what you're left with is this centrist party that embraces globalization, Wall Street, and they happen to be socially liberal. And I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but thanks to Trump, Trump, it seems like
Trump
has
has made all these things possible, hasn't he?
Exactly.
Well, they have the Democrats had a saying back in the 90s. I don't know if the Democrat who came up with this saying, but if you go back and look at newspaper headlines from the early days of the Clinton administration, they had this saying that people, these different constituent groups on the left of the Democratic coalition had nowhere else to go.
Right.
And there's two places in particular where you see this. One is, do you remember the Sister Soldier moment?
Oh yeah,
remember this?
Absolutely.
When Clinton contrived to insult Jesse Jackson to his face in front of the TV cameras of the nation. And that was all the newspaper columnists were like, well, he can do that because they've got nowhere else to go. And then the year, that was 92, the next year, Clinton got NAFTA passed over the objections of organized labor. And he just ran the bulldozer over these guys, with his right-hand man, Rahm Emanuel, and the other one, Bill Daley, the Chicago guys. Were the ones that got this thing done. And again, all the newspaper columnists were like, well, so what? They've got nowhere else to go. And that's Hillary Clinton is looking at people like that again, and that's the logic. Look, that is always what they do, and they will do that forever. I mean, even as they were talking about how much they loved working people, there were all of these Wall Street people there in Philadelphia throwing these, I imagine, very extravagant parties.
It was obscene.
It's always the way it goes with these guys.
The parties and the price tags for the parties were rather obscene, and they were all being hosted by someone from Wall Street. It was quite perverse. So now that sentiment is there, right? They've been using that for a very long time. You have nowhere else to go. Well, in this election, in a sense, in terms of the two major parties, Trump is not an option. What do you do? What? Let's talk
Trump,
about you.
For a while there, Trump was. I mean, there was something interesting about Trump before the wheels came off. And what was interesting about him was that in his twisted, sort of upside down way, he was offering a lot of these people somewhere else to go, right? All of his raving about the trade agreements. Now, Trump is a fool and a dangerous, a dangerous man, and it's all come apart for him now. But you can easily see how, in different hands, the hands of someone who's sane, that strategy could work. Against the Democrats for the Republicans. I mean, this is what's the matter with Kansas is all about. It's been working in certain circumstances for years and years and years. They don't know, the Republicans don't offer these these disgruntled white working class people very much. Right. They don't certainly nothing tangible, but they do offer them the culture wars. They do give them that. And they do, rant and rave about Hollywood and big government and all of this kind of crap, and talk about your guns and all this sort of thing, and they do give them that.
Well, so in the absence of that, right? So now you don't have Trump anymore being, even if for a fleeting moment he was an option, he's becoming even less so as the hours tick by. What do you It's like every time I turn on the computer, every time I fire up the it's something else.
One of these news sites.
He
literally every day he's done some new outrage.
He seems to find a way to outdo himself every single day, every single hour. So let me ask you then, in terms of that concept of there's nowhere else to go, what do you say to people who want to vote for Jill Stein, third party, in context of this two-party system and the idea that may chip away and actually help Hillary Clinton? What do you, not Hillary Clinton, but Donald Trump? What are your thoughts in that calculus?
Well, that's, I'm always, I love third-party movements. So this is one of my things. I started out in life, I come from Kansas, and we had a third-party movement there in the 1890s called populism. It was a left wing. It was a farmer labor kind of movement. They actually had it all over the South, all over the West. It was all over the place except for in the East. And they took over the state in Kansas for a while there, and it really scared the people who own Kansas, the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And so and populism did this all over the place. By the way, it's a fascinating history, and it's actually still very controversial. You still read all kinds of crap about it, that people get the story wrong in all sorts of ways. But it was a fascinating time. But they used an electoral technique called fusion. You've probably heard of this, where you would vote for, they would basically gang up with one of the other two major parties. So in the South, they would align with the Republican Party. This is in the 1890s. The Republican Party was very small in the South back then. And in the North and in Kansas, they would align with the local Democratic Party to team up against the local dominant party. Anyhow, that was called fusion voting. As soon as the populists had been clubbed down, they made this illegal in all of these states, illegal. And that ended third parties as a sort of viable tradition in America. You just don't see them popping up after that. You have various efforts by prominent individuals to run for the presidency, right. Like La Follette or what was the guy, the billionaire?
Ross
Perot, yeah. Yeah, or Ralph Nader, various, prominent individuals running for the presidency, but nobody tries to build a third party after that from the bottom up, or people try, they don't succeed. I would love to see that happen again. I just don't think it's possible without a change in the laws. I mean, there has never been a time when I thought the two-party system was more discredited than right now. It's just... It's loathsome what is going on this year, and this is a year that started out with such promise. I was so proud of Bernie Sanders, of the things he was saying and how he had broken through in a way that nobody has done in a long time. Looked like it was going to be a great year, and now, ooh, it's just every time I turn on the computer, it's something awful. But look, in general, I love the idea of third parties, but they have the eternal problem with third parties is the spoiler problem, that you don't want to vote for the candidate who really shares your views, because then you will, you don't want to vote for, let's say in the year 2000, you don't want to vote for Nader because then you're afraid that Al Gore will lose or something like that.
Right.
And this is a very reasonable fear, and it makes it impossible to build, very, very difficult to build a third-party movement. But fusion voting solved that problem, and it would be nice to see that come back. If we could solve that problem, then I would be really into third parties. I'd go out and work for them. I'd do all sorts of things. Although I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of Democrats out there that I really like.
Yeah. So tell me, and I know, we're coming up at the top of the hour, but I want to get a couple more questions in. What are your thoughts about Jill Stein then? Where do you stand? And, as much as you can discuss it, what are your thoughts about Jill?
She seems like a good person. I haven't studied her or anything like that. As a writer and as a journalist, I've really been focusing on the two big parties so far. But she seems like a good person. Look, if Hillary is miles and miles ahead, that also solves the spoiler problem.
Yep.
You don't have to worry about that anymore if she's going to win in every state or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my thought exactly, right? So she should be, after today's shenanigans, Hillary should be beating with the Second Amendment thing that Donald Trump did today.
Yeah, I saw that.
Hillary,
it's like, what is wrong with this man?
We're trying to figure that out. I'll be honest with you. Hillary should be beating him by 15 points at this point. So I think people should be able to, particularly in definitely in safe states, quote unquote safe states, should be able to feel free to not have that spoiler problem. So one last question I want to ask you is kind of like a big overarching thing, because and kind of a definition. Each person that I speak to, I had a chance to speak with Eddie Glaude Jr., Adolph Reed, and each of time we spoke about neoliberalism.
Adolph Reed is one of my heroes. That guy can see through the bullshit like nobody. He's I like him.
masterful. He's masterful. And each of them gave like a working definition of neoliberalism. But for you, you said that you don't really like to use that word.
I don't like to use the word because it confuses people. Because it's a British term. So for the British, the liberals were this 19th century party, with Gladstone and that sort of thing. And they believed in free trade and they believed in laissez-faire economics and that sort of thing. And then they pretty much died out. They were supplanted by the Labour Party, who moved considerably to the left. But that's the British definition. So there, to say neoliberal makes a lot of sense. But here, we think of liberals as a Franklin Roosevelt types.
Right.
And to say, you take a guy like Ronald Reagan, who's this sort of, this very neoliberal figure in the British sense, or Margaret Thatcher, they don't seem liberal to us.
Right.
That's all. That's my only problem with it. It's just
So,
but it's.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
But you and I know what it means, so we can use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And my audience, I hit them across the head with it like every other night. So they're getting to the point where they that it's kind of an accepted word, a choice to describe what's going on. But if you could leave us with what is your snapshot definition of neoliberalism, one, and then the bigger question is, how do we begin to fight back against it, or is it even feasible to do so at this point? So how do you define it, and how do you fight against it?
Oh, yes. So I would actually change your definition a little bit, because what I'm interested in these days is Clintonism, which I associate with Bill Clinton, but I imagine Hillary will see a lot of the same kind of thing. Clintonism is exactly what you just described. It's deregulation for Wall Street. It's this, it's what they call "quote unquote" free trade, with NAFTA and permanent normal trade in China and the WTO and this kind of thing. But it's all of these favors for the knowledge industries, as they like to call them, and at the same time, so some people get the carrot and other people get the stick. At the same time, using the heavy hand of the state to punish all of these people at the other end of the spectrum. So you have welfare reform at the exact same time that he is doing all these amazing favors for Wall Street, including bailouts, right? Bill Clinton did this backdoor bailout for Citibank via the Mexican bonds that the Mexican government had been issuing. And they bailed out a hedge fund when Bill Clinton was president. It's not widely remembered anymore, but they did. And at the same time, they're destroying the welfare program, and there's this enormous private prison roundup that is going on, this mass incarceration thing. That's Clintonism. And that's a kind of, Clinton got a lot of the neoliberal agenda done that the Republicans could not achieve.
Never do. Yeah.
He got all these sort of things. So bank deregulation was something the Republicans really wanted to do, but they couldn't do it, especially repealing Glass-Steagall. I mean, Reagan started chipping away at it, but he didn't get very far. It was Clinton that really did it. There was this whole series of bank deregulations when Clinton was president. And these were things, and the Clinton people, by the way, this is in Listen Liberal, they boasted about this in their internal White House memos. We did what Reagan couldn't do. We got things done that even Reagan could. They were proud of this. And this is what we're looking at. So this is extremely backwards economically, but of course they don't see it that way. They see it as this great advance. It's the knowledge industries. It's it's this wonderful innovation districts and all this kind of thing. And then socially very liberal, but extremely backwards with regards to people who work for a living. And that's Clintonism. And it's coming. It'll be back. I mean, it's on its way. There's nothing stopping it now.
Thomas Frank, the author of the book Listen Liberal, or Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I've been a fan of your work for some time, so I was very excited when you were available to come on.
Me as well. I'm a fan of yours as well.
Awesome.
I've been watching you on YouTube for quite a while.
Oh, really? Wow, that's
yeah.
Well, okay, I'm going to be smiling for a little while because I honestly, I love, again, I said at the top, but I absolutely love reading work that actually explains what I've been grappling with. And with What's the Matter with Kansas, I was grappling with that exact question and you answered it. And with Listen Liberal, I was grappling with the exact question of what the hell is going on with the Democratic Party. And I think you really answered it in a very masterful way. So thank you so much for coming on. I have to get you back so we can just do a full show, a full hour conversation on some deep dives.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Sure thing.
857-600-0518 is the place to call if you want to get in on that. Thomas Frank said he was a fan of mine. How about that? He's been watching my videos on YouTube. All right. How about that?